Hello, folks. Welcome back to the final presentation we have for you here at Big Data Conference Europe 2022. And well, it's my pleasure to introduce this man next to me. Brian O'Neill is here to see us out, our final keynote speaker. And technically, this is the final talk of the day, but you will be able to go watch them all back. And that seems fitting, Brian. I'm going to let you take over now because you're here to tell us all about those annoying roll the eye moments when someone uses that term technically.
Well, thank you, Big Data EU, for having me. It's great to close out the conference for all of you. Go World Cup soccer. I know you all have games to watch, and the weekend is upon us. So I'm going to give you about 45 minutes here of some talk and some insights and hopefully some inspiration about how we put customers and users at the center of the data product work that we're doing. So why customers can't or won't use your technically right data products. So let's jump into this. I want to start with a story because we all love stories, right? This is a 6-year project, and there are thousands of components, schematics, diagrams, like all the stuff that goes into these complex things that we all work on. And technically, you could make the argument that this system worked as designed at a critical point. And so what was the experience like for the user on the other side of this 6-year project that had all these components and technical things that had to come together? And so I want to give you an example of what was seen on the screen. This system, and I'll tell you about what it is in a minute, was a root cause analysis system. So some of you have probably worked on these kinds of analytic systems before that are looking at all the data and then coming up with some kind of a conclusion based on what's going on in the data. ZDA-110-3-15-1. This was an example output of the system for the user. This is what the user would see. But there was a little bit more text, there was a little bit more context that said attic, nave, sacristy, and then the system code and the words aspirating framework. So my question for you is, does this look like human-centered decision support? And decision support is at the core of what many of us are working on when we really talk about analytics and machine learning, particularly in the enterprise and predicting the future. We're really talking about helping users make better decisions. So does this look like human-centered decision support? So what is this? This is the story of Notre Dame, and we all know what happened at Notre Dame, right? What was the requirements of the system here? Well, we're talking about the fire, right? Identify the ID of the fire detection device and display it. So from a requirement standpoint, in terms of what was asked for of the system, you could make the argument that this system actually worked as intended. Did the right sensor trigger at the right time, and was it shown on the screen in the right code, which was the identifier of the device? Yes. The desired outcome of this entire system was to prevent a fire or hopefully stop a fire once it had started, right? Now, there wasn't actually a fire suppression system in Notre Dame, as I understand it. But obviously, if you had been informed soon enough and you had excellent decision support information, you might have been able to prevent it from going to the scale that it did. So the question is, did this technology work for the users, for the desired outcome that it was set out to do? And so obviously, we know what happened, right? And I guess my favorite part of this, and the irony here, is that the word fire here actually never appeared at any time on the screen. And the person using the system was rather new to it as well, and actually ended up going to the wrong part of the cathedral. There was a lot of errors that happened here as a result of largely due to this system that did not do its job in terms of the intended outcome. So if you saw the words aspirating framework and attic, nave, sacristy and a system code, again, does this feel like good decision support if your human goal and the organization goal, in this case also a community goal, was to prevent fire in a precious landmark, right? So how do we think about this from a human-centered standpoint? This mock-up here is not intended to like be a real application or something, but I wanted to talk to you about the other things we need to think about besides if this had been a data-driven service that did the same thing, it pointed to some root cause analysis and it gave a cryptic message like that, there are other components that we need to be thinking about. The context. Where was this fire, right? Where in the cathedral did it happen? And how far away is that from me? And if you think about it, a fire is also a very social experience, right? You have the safety of the people immediately in the vicinity of the fire. You have the community outside of the fire. You have the staff. You have the emergency response people, the fire department. There's communications involved. There's a whole lot of things that collectively would become part of this, you could call it this fire use case, right? Or fire prevention use case. There's inherently a group experience here. There are many different humans in the loop here. And so focusing only on the technology piece in isolation without thinking about the overall deployment or operationalization, as it's sometimes called in the machine learning world, and I don't like this term, and probably we'll talk about that a little more in a second. To me, this is what lends us to having technically right, effectively wrong solutions that don't end up getting used because they are effectively incomplete for the people we're trying to serve, right? So this is going to be kind of the theme, not this fire, but this idea of putting the humans in a loop at the center of our work, users, sponsors, stakeholders, even affected third parties. So a little about me, as you might tell from the background here, I'm actually trained as a professional percussionist, and that's one of my careers. I work and live in Boston, Massachusetts, go Team USA, World Cup. But I also help enterprise technology leaders increase adoption of data products. And I'm sure many of you have seen this challenge, right? A large, over 80% on many surveys repeatedly are showing that getting, particularly AI now, into the enterprise is difficult. It is getting better, which is great, but there are significant challenges there, and most of them are not technology oriented. They're failing at the human level, the organization, the culture, all these things that are not part of our infrastructure, the machine learning pipeline, and all of that. So anyhow, I also host a podcast called Experiencing Data, which maybe you've heard, where I talk about this all the time. So, but let's move on. If you make platforms, models, apps, tools, or dashboards, guess what? You or the people on your team, you're already a designer. So the difference between you and a professional designer with a capital D is really about how much intention you put into the work. How much did you intentionally think about the entire end-to-end experience, the design, the touch points, all of this? How much did you think about designing in the adoption from the beginning? Not just the model in isolation, not just the ETL, not just the pipelines, not just the dashboard. Even if you do GUI work, data viz work, BI tooling work, or you're even a web designer, a UI designer, for example, there's always a bigger context in which this work sits. So how much intention are you putting in? You cannot make a null design choice. Every choice, including not to think about it at all and just let it emerge, which I call byproduct design, not product design, that is also a choice. So what I want you to do is apply intent. And you don't need to be a professional designer to start thinking about some of these things. This is something we all can begin to learn about doing this. And this is a team effort that happens with everybody on the team. Ideally, a team that is problem oriented. And so they feel ownership of the problem and not just the solution side. And I think that's a mindset shift that needs to come from management, is this idea that I push a problem that the business has, or our users or customers or whoever we're serving with this data product we're going to make, we push the problem space to the team and they have a collective ownership of that. And together, the team designs the solution towards an outcome and not an output. And we're going to talk more about that in a second as well. But I've already used the word data product several times. And if you remember, this term big data has gotten thrown around so much, and it often goes undefined. And it's kind of like, well, you know it when you see it. And if you're part of that tribe, then you're doing it. But no one's ever really written down a great definition of what it is. When is it not medium data? When is it big data? So I'm putting a definition around what my definition of data product for the context of the work that I do. And I want to share that with you right now. And this is actually a very brand new thing for me, because I have been using this word and I haven't taken the time to define it. And my definition of a data product is a data-driven, end-to-end, human-in-the-loop decision support solution that's so valuable, users will pay to use it if they have to. And so this is what I call this is the producty definition of data product. A lot of the technical definitions are often different. They're focusing on the data part itself, or a package set of data that gets used for different purposes. But what I want you to hone in on is they would pay to use it if they have to. Why am I talking about paying to use it? Because I know a lot of you are working in the enterprise and you're building internal tooling, internal models, decision support systems, et cetera. The point here is to capture the idea that the quality of the solution matters so much that in theory, someone would want to pay you to use it because it becomes so indispensable to them. And them can be your colleagues, the vendors, your internal colleagues, the stakeholders that you serve, the other employees and departments that you work for. I want you to take this idea that the work we're doing should be that good, that theoretically, if they had to pay us to use it, they would use it. That's how much intention we've applied to the work, to focus on the quality of the work, not the technically right part, but the value as perceived by them, because value is always something that's perceived by others. And this is why when I go to like a fancy women's handbag store, I can't believe how much things cost. But for another person, I would gladly pay $8,000 to have that handbag. Value is totally subjective, right? Some people, look at cars, look at anything in life, look at how much a soccer ticket, a Taylor Swift ticket going for $10,000. Someone that doesn't like Taylor Swift says it's not worth it. So the key here is that the value lies in the eyes of the person we're serving. And we want to make it so good that they might pay for it. So that's what I want to carry through in today's conversation. And so there's a lot I have to say about design and product in this context of data products, but there's really just 3 ideas to get started. And I know a lot of you probably don't have data product management on your team, or you don't have designers helping you out with the data science work that you're doing. So I just want to give you 3 ideas that you can take home today or take back to work and start using to address this technically right, effectively wrong problem that's plaguing us. And it's creating a lot of wasted talent, a lot of wasted money, a lot of wasted time, because we're building things that never get used. So the first one is routine exposure to customers is key. Now, customers here really means users, stakeholders, actual paying customers, depending on who you serve. Usually there's at least 2. There's someone paying for a project and there's someone benefiting from it. Sometimes they're the same person, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you're paying the VP of the department, but the staff under that VP are the ones you're serving. Those are your users. The point is, whoever's using it, you need to have routine exposure to these people on your team. And this means dedicating time, not making models, not making dashboards, not coding, not doing engineering, but simply listening, observing, watching what it's like to be them, watching what it's like to be the VP of marketing, setting up an ad campaign and trying to figure out how much money should I dedicate to each bucket of creative that I'm running. How will I know if I'm getting a good CPM? If you're a salesperson, I'm trying to figure out which leads to call in the CRM. Who should I be calling? Understanding what it's like to be them. This routine exposure to customers and users, this is the best way to get your team to start being able to see how they can have more impact, and not living in the data silo world, not living in this isolated world where everything is abstracted out of the business and you don't even know why someone needs the data that you need. It's just like, well, that's what we were told to give them, so we're going to give it to them. If you want to leap out of that, you want to become a source of innovation for the business and a real partner to the business in terms of the value, this is partly what has to happen. Okay. The second one here is that without user adoption, you have no business value. So solve the user adoption problem first, then the business value will follow. If you're a leader in this space, and your task, because ultimately leadership is usually when tasked with delivering value from these technology initiatives. If you focus on solving that user adoption thing by making it indispensable for them, you will get the business value as long as you've correctly aligned that you understand those goals and you've done the proper discovery work. It will follow. But if you try to jump right to business value, theoretical value, here's this model that we did this thing for you and it's going to change your life because look, it can predict X. And then they say, that's nice, but I don't know how you came up with that number. And it's like, I think I'm just going to use my other tooling because I don't really know how you came up with that. Well, you might see the potential business value in your thing, but what you've done is you've casted a value judgment on the user. You've said, look at this thing I made, this model, this dashboard, this tool, this report, this visualization, and you're saying how great it is, but they're not saying how great it is. So first make it great for the people, and then the business value will follow. The third one here is that teams need to own the problem space, as I talked about earlier, and they need to create outcomes, not outputs. And this is a really big one, and there's a great book on this that I did not write. This is not my idea, but I'm a strong believer in this, that downstream from the technology artifacts and things we make are outcomes. They may not be positive ones, they may be negative ones, they may be nothing. But the point is the team should be shooting for the outcomes that will happen as a result of the technology we made. So this necessitates designing with our users and stakeholders and not designing for our stakeholders and customers. You need together to define what would success look like at the beginning of the initiative. How will we know if we're doing a great job on this or not? When we get to the end, when that model is deployed, or when we have this dashboard that you've been asking for, how would we know if we did a great job? What would change in the world? How do we measure it? Usually there's some numbers associated with it. Sometimes there's more qualitative aspects to it. Like I have 5 department heads that are basically smiling and saying, this is really useful. You might have some metrics like that. But figuring this out together beforehand is how you get better at actually designing for outcomes and not just creating the technology outputs and saying, not my problem, we did our part. If they don't want to use it, I don't have any control over that. That is not how you're going to position a data team as being a strategic partner to the business, because you're focused on just the output piece. And frankly, nobody cares. They don't care about the inputs. They don't care about the effort. They just want to know what's in it for me. How is it going to help me, right? So again, I want you to move this guy to this happy person here. Whoever this stakeholder is, delight them, and the business value will follow. Okay, so design matters. Hopefully we've made this point already. The design of these systems matters, and bad design is expensive. Sometimes it's even harmful. And worse, I think this poor design, when we push things out that don't work and serve the people that they're for, it's a waste of talent, because you've got great talent that's constantly putting out stuff that doesn't get used. And I don't know about you, I want to do work that matters, and I want to put things in the world that matter. And when people don't use the stuff that I work on, that bothers me, and it's not fun. And I would imagine for many of you, it's much more rewarding from a career standpoint when you feel the impact that your work is having. So this is why we need to think about design and remember that there's no non-design choices. There is no null choice. We need to get better applying at this so that our technology stuff that we do actually gets into the world and gets deployed. And so your world might look like this. And the funny part is this slide always goes out of date by the time I give a thing, because the technology is moving so fast. But customers on the right side of the brace here, they just want PDFs. They want a software tool. They want a report. They want a spreadsheet. They want an email notification. They want decision support. They want help making a better decision in the future, so they can get a raise, so they have better status, so they have more power, so they have a competitive edge, whatever it may be. No adoption means no business value. So you need to stop talking about the stuff on the left, because they don't care about it. And even as a designer, when I'm consulting with companies, I don't talk about the design process, and I don't talk about design stuff with them. I focus on what they need to, what the future state that they're trying to get to, because they don't care about all the way that the sausage is made, as we say, right? So customer needs and problems and pains are these requirements that we talk about. They're not in the requirement stock, and they're not in the Jira tickets, and they're not in the email requests. If you're getting requests for things like, give me field X and table Y, this is what I call a presenting problem. This person is actually trying to make a decision that they think field X and table Y is going to help me with that. Oh, and it has to be a CSV, and please sort it by this date column, right? There are definitely times when, yes, it's like, we don't need to ask why, let's just give them what they need, and we can getting better at knowing when to just service that need versus when to push back and to understand, well, why do you need that field? How is that going to help you make a decision? Because they may be self-diagnosing their situation, and you may have knowledge of all the data and the ways that they could be making a better decision if only you knew what the decision was that they're actually trying to make. So beware of what these presenting problems, the surface level ask, and be willing to dig in by asking generous questions, generous, empathetic why questions. Okay. So what does bad design look like? We've talked about this bad and good design here. Bad design in the context of data products to me is that giving them what they asked for, right? Addressing the presenting problem only with no questions asked. You're not giving them a gift. You're actually potentially giving them a problem by doing that. Usability issues, like it's too hard to get the insights that I need. Utility issues, which are slightly different. This is the tool, the prediction, the report is not particularly useful. I understand how to use it, but that data just isn't useful for me. It's a slightly different class of design problems. Another one is expecting users to adapt to your solution. So the data literacy argument is used a lot here. And while I think there's definitely room for data literacy in organizations, that is a slow change process that will happen over time. And I want to challenge you to meet people where they're at and get out of the mindset that it's everyone else's job to become more literate so that they can understand the technical domain of statistics and math and technology and engineering and all the stuff that you all know really well. This attitude that it's about everyone else needing to change to accommodate this technology we're making, that is not going to work, because you are pushing you're pushing this little rock up a giant hill. So yes, there's space for data literacy, but I want you to challenge you to meet people where they're at. And part of this is like not knowing how the data fits into the customer's job and the workflow. And this is back to that giving them what they asked for. If you understood and had spent the time with them to understand what's it like to be the VP of sales and to not be making successful outbound sales calls or whatever it is, if you don't know what that's like, then your solution is more likely going to ask them a big ask. It's going to ask them to change how they do their work now. It's probably not going to fit naturally into their workflow, and it may even be perceived as a tax and not a benefit. So waiting too long to get feedback by not designing with our customers and stakeholders, but instead designing for them. This is another issue. We need to be doing smaller increments of work. We need to be getting those increments in front of them. And by doing that, we are building an ally, and our stakeholders and users are actually putting something into the work that we're doing and feeling a sense of ownership. And this is another way to get higher adoption of these things, is by making them part of the solution with you. Other issues with bad design are wrong or too much automation, lack of user control, particularly with AI systems, is not being able to override the model, not being able to give inputs there, automating when it shouldn't be automated too soon, where human in the loop decision making needs to happen. And you won't know that if you haven't done that research stuff I was talking about. You won't know this until it's too late, or you have to now go undo some of the work that you've done because the feedback is poor. This gets into like black box predictions. I am happy to see that I think there's a trend in reducing the number of black box models that are used, because people are realizing that interpretability often matters more than predictive accuracy, because if they're not willing to use it, we can't get the business value. So let's give them something they're willing to use, even if the predictive accuracy might be less. And by having interpretability into the model, that helps people be more willing to try using these new technologies in service of the work that they're trying to do. The last two things are unreasonable or unrealistic tool time expectations. This is when your solution, like if it's like, here's this Tableau, dashboard that we made for you, and it requires them to do all kinds of like picking and choosing of data sets, and then you put the charts together, and it's this idea of it's a self-service system, but there's a lot of tooling effort required for this person to get the value out of it. If there's too much tool time expectation, they're probably just going to abandon it, because most people want a finished service, solution for them. They don't want to put a ton of effort into having to do it themselves. So beware of when you're asking for something that's actually a task, a tax on them, even if it feels like it should be a benefit. Like being able to customize it always sounds good, but customizing can also be a tax. And so being aware of this, whether you're actually shipping a poor design instead of a good design. And the last comment here is this MVPs that are actually engineering POCs, a proof of concept that you think is an MVP, but it's really not. You've proved out some technology, but it's not necessarily the minimum valuable product that you could be shipping to your users. Those are not the same thing. So a minimum valuable product means that outcome thing that we talked about, we've actually made a dent and an impact. We've produced some type of outcome, even if it's small. That's what an MVP is. A POC is just proving out that a piece of technology technically works. So ask yourselves, are we showing our users a POC, or are we really showing them an MVP? So the flip side of this, what's good design with data products here? Largely, it's about inspiring action or inaction based on the insights and the data. You're really actually facilitating decision making. It's considerate of people's time. It's designed into the context of the user. So if you're building a routing algorithm for your truck driver fleet, you're not sending them a PDF report formatted for desktop. You're giving them a mobile application that sits in their car that's providing turn-by-turn recommendations or routing decisions on the fly in real time, because they're not going to open the PDF report in the morning and then try to display that while they're driving their truck around doing their stops. Context matters. And if you don't know what it's like to be a truck driver, it's going to be hard for you to actually design a great solution for them. So low tool time, low or no training. These are great design principles. It should feel helpful, if not even potentially fun or delightful. It should anticipate questions that people are going to ask about the data because you've gotten to know their domain. It should reduce effort. It should reduce risk. When we get into AI, there's a whole ethical part here, which is helping users understand where damage or harm can be caused, so that when they're making decisions based on what algorithms say, they're aware of what has gone into that process. Some of that should be obfuscated and taken care of in the technology stack itself, but also with AI, it's balancing that trade-off of predictive accuracy and interpretability, providing explainability of the model when relevant. This idea of, and I just saw the Stanford conference on this idea of AI in the loop instead of human in the loop. And I really like this because it says humans are at the center and the AI is in the loop of the humans, not the other way around. We're not ejecting users into an AI system. And I really like that framing here. The last one I really want to comment on is your solution intentionally declarative or exploratory? So what do I mean is declarative is like, our system, like the Notre Dame example, that's declarative. The system is making a recommendation. It found some insights. It derived a conclusion. Is your solution supposed to do that? Or is it supposed to be exploratory, where you put it together, we're giving you the raw building blocks to do that, but you, dear user, it's your job to go and explore that data and make an insight out of it. Most users don't really want to do that because that takes time and effort and it's a tax. Now, I'm not saying all customization is bad, but I think you need to frame whether or not you're actually building a declarative solution or an exploratory solution, and make sure that everyone's on the same page about what the desired outcome is and what the effort is going to be that's required for that. So what does this stuff look like in in practice, right? And so I wanted to give you kind of 3 design principles here to take into your data product work, and show you some examples as well. So the first one here, sorry, but nobody really wants your machine learning or analytics. They just don't. They just want, they're selfishly interested. They just want useful decision support at the right time. They want it to be easy. They want it to be valuable. They don't actually want the analytics, and they don't want the machine learning. And I want to give you an example here of a project that I worked on, a product that I used to work on this very many years ago, so I'm not able to actually show you some of these screens. But imagine you're an IT systems administrator for like a mid-size enterprise, and you have all on-premise storage and compute infrastructure. So all your own hardware, you're managing everything. And particularly, you manage storage and servers for the company, and you basically keep things running from an IT perspective, right? When it works, nobody notices it. It's just like oxygen in the air. We don't even think about it because it just runs, right? But when something goes down, or even more specifically in this case, when things are running really slowly, when the CRM system is dragging, or nobody can check their email, even though the exchange loads, but it's like dragging and you're waiting and waiting for inboxes, like slowness and performance issues are very hard to troubleshoot. And people get mad. The business is losing money when there's downtime, and your job is on the line when those things happen. So like the fire suppression example here, in this case, this tool was intended to help people solve performance issues quickly because business downtime is very expensive. So how can analytics help, especially in these very complex systems in the data center where there's tons of telemetry and metrics being collected all over the place? And so when I came in, the main component on the dashboard of this tool that's used for performance management was a list of all of the virtual machines that this tool was able to go observe in the data center. In this case, there were 1,321 VMs. You can basically think of a VM as an application, a business application that's running, right? And so this is what you were given in the morning when you're an IT person to know whether or not something is wrong. How bad is the problem? How long has the problem persisted? How do I fix it? Whose fault is it, or what's the issue with it? And again, how do I fix it? You had to look at 1,321 virtual machines and a bunch of statistics here in order to figure this out. And so this was not particularly useful at delivering a fast experience for users to do that kind of work. The goal here again is to keep that oxygen flowing, right? If everything's working, nobody's calling me. And so we actually found out that through research that some of the customers are just like, I don't even log into this anymore because there's so much telemetry coming at me. I just wait for the phone to ring at this point. And the issue with this is now you're just being reactive, and they're just waiting for the phone to ring. And when it rings, it's usually not very good because at that point, something is really bad. And so we wanted to give them, as soon as an anomaly was detected like this fire, a way to address this more quickly. So by going and talking to them, this is the redesign of this dashboard component. And this is just one aspect of this product. But what we did here is we went out and figured out, well, how do you do troubleshooting for performance issues as an IT administrator? What's that like? How do you solve it now without our tool? Or even if it's with our tool, the way it's designed now, just walk us through your workflow. And over time, we started to understand that there was a very logical process they went through. And so we tried to fit the design into that. So if you look, there's some black squares here on the screen. These are annotations. And this is kind of the path that users would take when they use this. And this redesign here basically eliminated a lot of the need for them to use the product. And this actually could be, this content was actually emailed to them. We found out that alerting them with this information was usually enough for them to begin taking action. Right? So we actually reduced their need to use this tool in the first place, which was a positive win because it means business uptime is going up. So I'm just going to walk you through this to get an understanding of what we learned from users by doing the requisite research and designing this with them and changing it over time as we got feedback. So all you need to really know is the blue charts here, this historical performance index. This is just an index that has to do with how efficient the storage system is providing performance. It doesn't matter what went into it for now, but the main way they thought about this is the first question they would ask in their troubleshooting workflow is this a problem right now, and how long has it been going on? And because you have weekends here, they wanted to know approximately 3 days. We actually spent a lot of time figuring out what that first spark line in the center should be. And we kind of learned 72 hours was a good enough snapshot to understand how significant might this problem be. The second thing, the second annotation number 2, was periodicity. They wanted to know, is this normally hot? Let's just use the word hot when the PI is high, right? And it's hitting that red dotted line. When the PI is hot, is that normally like this at this time of day, on this kind of day? It looks like it's like Friday at about 2 in the morning right now. Is that normal or not? Well, and I would ask, well, how do you know that? Well, I would go look at the history and kind of look at the shape. And if I see a lot of periods there and then a spike, then I know that that spike is probably irregular and may not be normal. So we gave them the last 6 weeks as a spark line without having to leave the screen. And immediately you can see the 3 in trouble now. There's an anomaly at the end, right? There's a blip at the end of each of those first 3 spark lines in the first column. There's a blip. And the blip is what's blown out in the 72-hour spark line. At this point, they now know this is an irregular thing. WebTrade 1, Exchange Boss, and Oracle Data Mart 2, these have unusual performance issues right now. And what's the next question? Number 3, why? What is going on that the performance is spiking right now? And so this system was able to, again, look at the telemetry, dig into the CPU, memory, and storage, and actually pull out some predictions about what the issue would be. At this point, these users knew the business impact because they know these VMs. We've surfaced just the hot systems, not all the green systems that are working fine, just the ones in trouble. We've pushed the most urgent business issues to the front. We've also told them why, so that they could just pick up the phone now and say, I'm going to call my VM guy or whatever and tell him, hey, it looks like you have CPU and memory issues on WebTrade 1. Can you go look into that? He has all the evidence to have that phone call now without slicing and dicing metrics and pulling together all eyeball analysis slides, etc. And so we could not have arrived at this design without actually designing it with them and doing the requisite research to understand what is it like to troubleshoot problems as an IT data center storage performance person, like when you do this kind of work. So a couple other concepts I want to get involved or get across to you today, involving those users and stakeholders early with small efforts, prototypes, low fidelity concepts. So in the design world, we use sketching and low fidelity work. If you're a data engineer or you're a machine learning engineer or a data scientist, what is your sketch equivalent of an API, of a data platform, of a model? I want you to think about how could we do some type of low fidelity work, get something into the hands of our users sooner than later, and stop guessing what might be needed, but instead actually provide something and get feedback on it. And again, build this recurring loop of quick iteration and quick feedback so that we don't drift, because models can drift, but our solution can also drift too if we're not routinely checking in. So this throw it over the wall and then it comes back 3 months later. This is not how we want to do it. We want to design it with them, but it may need thinking about what is the low fidelity equivalent, the sketch equivalent to the technical work that I might doing. Because I know that some of you probably are not doing the dashboarding. You're not doing the final UI work that comes out at the end. You're doing other parts. But ultimately, shortening these cycles of getting material in front of users is critical. The third idea here is that your data product's usability can and it should be tested with users. And I'm not talking about QA. I'm talking about, is it going to deliver the outcomes that we want? Does it allow users to perform the tasks that they want, to get the decision support that they want? These things can be tested. And I want to just give you kind of an example of what happens in a test or what the results of a test might be and how we change a design based on that. So this example was a project I did with called the Artist Revenue Streams Data Portal. So basically, there was a nonprofit group in DC that wanted to study how do musicians in the United States make a living, because a lot of people don't really know what it's like to have the career of a musician. Where does their income come from? And so they did the first large-scale study of this. And what they wanted to do is present an interactive dashboard or tool here for the public and the press, particularly musicians, but also the press, and then the lobbying groups in Congress to start to understand what's it like to be a musician and what does that look like. So after the survey data was done, we designed this portal. And in particular, I want to hone in. This is just an idea of what it looks like. Basically, there's a faceted search, just like if you're doing a flight search on a lot of the websites, you have all your facets on the left and then the data updates on the right. And so most users would do something like, well, I want to see the cohort like me. So show me jazz musicians with at least a master's degree in music performance. I want to look at just men because I'm a male, and people with at least, X years of experience. And they wanted to kind of self-compare themselves to their cohort. So this income trend chart here in the middle, this is what I want to draw your eye to. I'm gonna blow it up for you and show you the before and after here. But hopefully you can read this and you have this blown up on your screen. Before the study, when we gave users a task to perform and we asked them, is there any information here that talks about how income is changing over time? We wanted them to A, be able to find this component, and then B, tell us what the component said. And so when we had the design on the left, it says, which income categories were perceived to be increasing? Well, it looks teaching up 20%, songwriting and composing up 2%, and what's going down in terms of income? Those 5, session work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What happened here when we studied this is that users were concluding that teaching revenue was up 20%, and songwriting and composing revenue income was up 2%, and session work was down 13%. That's not what the study data, that's not what the questions that were asked in the study were intended to do. So this was a misread by the users not because they're wrong, but the design was wrong. And we would not have caught this unless we had actually run people through the design, real musicians actually going through the design and giving feedback based on the task that we gave them. Not a demo, but actually a use case. We gave them a realistic use case and just told them to tell us what it means. We didn't guide them at all. We just asked them. After the study, we came up with this design. And what's the difference here? The difference here is that all the numbers, the quantitative values here is the cohort either saying, did it go up or did it go down or did it stay the same? Not by how much it went up or down, just did it go up or not. So 20% more respondents said income increased, teaching income had gone up. We don't know how much the income had gone up. We just know that generally they're making more money from teaching. And we also know on the right side, well, how many people actually said teaching is relevant to their work at all? In this case, 83%. But now they have an idea of like, how much should I even weigh teaching into the income? Well, it looks like most people are teaching as jazz musicians who are male, have this much experience. So it looks like a lot of people are teaching and 20% more of them are making more money that way. This redesign helped them understand that the number was not associated with the amount the income went up, but rather the number of people who self-reported that they were making more money from that. So you can test these things. APIs can be tested, platforms can be tested. Technical users, like if you're building a platform for your data scientists, you can test your data scientists using your platform. How easy is it to pull this data out of the system and merge it with this other one? How easy is it to browse the quality of the data? Technical users are also users, and we can design for them because an API is also designed. And I'm sure a lot of you have used poorly designed APIs before. These things can be designed even if they don't have interfaces, and they can be tested for user experience, for quality. So go out and test your work so you can learn and make it better. So all this idea of data product management and design, I wanted to share some other voices talking about this. IIA is a great organization to follow their webinars, but they see product thinking as essential to becoming effective at analytics. I had Kareem Lakhani on my podcast. He's a professor at HBS, and he wrote this book called Competing in the Age of AI, but specifically talking about the skill set of the data and analytics product manager. If you want to be AI-centered in the work that you're doing, this is an essential role to have in place there so that you're delivering outcomes and not just the outputs, right? Gartner's CDO version 4, they put out this kind of version of what the CDO's role is. This was, and back as far as 2019, was moving from project-centric to product-centered. this idea of product management being critical to actually getting AI and data products deployed and creating that value there. If you want to be customer centric, you need to have this kind of skill set. So just to kind of recap today, the big theme here, right, is you can't create business values if users can't or won't use your data products, right? You can even create harm. And I want you to go out there and make a difference in the work that you're doing. But it does mean we have to put users at the center of this work. And we need to understand our business sponsors as well and make sure we're delivering outcomes for both the users and the stakeholders who are paying for this, or customers. If you're a digital company, we're obviously talking about your paying customers. You know this well, and the stakes are higher. And so I would say if you're building for internal enterprise tools, you have it a lot easier because you're not actually you're getting a paycheck regardless, right? But if you're at a startup or you're at a software company, the reason they do so much better at this kind of work is because they have to. They have to make it worth paying for. But I challenge you to also bring yourself to that bar and watch the impact when your stuff goes into actually gets used by the business and gets used by users. You're going to feel better. The team's going to be more jazzed about doing this kind of work. You're going to have less turnover in the organization. It's better for you. It's better for them. It's better for everybody. So finally, just realize that your data products experience is the perceived reality of all of the technical work that you've done. Ultimately, again, users and customers don't care about the inputs. They just care about the outcomes, their selfish interest. How is this going to make my world better, my job better, my status better, empowering with better decisions, reduce my risk? And whatever that experience is using your thing, that's their perception of what you've spent all your time doing. Whether or not you actually did some crazy modeling stuff and you had merged like data from all these disparate systems and it's all messed up and you had to do all this cleaning and all this labeling to train the model, they don't care. And I'm sorry, but they just don't. And they don't care about the design really either. They just care about their selfish value and getting what they want out of it, just like users do. Like, does this help me or not? So go out and design an experience that's worth making. That's in service of them because it's good for you and it's good for them. So again, I gave you a lot of stuff today, but there's just those three ideas. And especially if you're a leader in management, these are the things that I want you to move forward with your team. You got to have that routine exposure, including the technical folks, and especially the technical folks. Let your machine learning engineers see what it's like for the user trying to use a predictive model in their work. Listen to the questions, the doubt, the trust issues, the concerns that they have. Bring these people together. You need that routine exposure. You need to carve out time that's not about making. It's about listening with empathy, and it's about observing what's going on. The second one is the business value emerges when you fix the low or no user adoption problem first. Designing for adoption is part of designing the solution. Operationalization doesn't happen later. It's not stage 2. It's not someone else's job to deploy the model into production. Deployment is designed into the solution from the start. User adoption is designed in from the start. If you're a data product manager, this may mean that you need to do some marketing. Even internally for your own solution, marketing may be required. And that's part of the design as well. So, and the third one here is that teams need to own the problem space, which means they need to understand the problem and not just the prescribed solution that the customer asked for. They need to feel ownership of the problem and the solution with the goal to deliver outcomes and not just outputs. Because building outputs, writing code, checking stuff into GitHub, making more dashboards, making more reports, it feels like we're making progress because we're making stuff. But progress and value are always in the eyes of the beholder and the people that we're making these things for. That's the only indication of whether we're actually making progress or not. Otherwise, it's just like, is it a scrimmage or is it a match? It's game time. The World Cup is now. It's not practice time. They don't care about the scrimmage. It's game time for your users, right? So go out and own that problem space, know that problem space, and deliver outcomes instead of outputs. So I hope this talk today was really informative and helpful for you. If you want more, I do have a mailing list, designingforanalytics.com/bigdataeu. Thank you for having me out here. You'll also get updates on my podcast, Experiencing Data, when those come out. I write up a one-page show summary, so if you don't have time to listen to the whole thing, you can get a nice little digest on every other Tuesday with that. And if you have questions, feel free to email me, brian@designingforanalytics.com. And again, that link there, if you'd like to hop on the mailing list, my free DFA Insights list. So thank you again for having me. I'm open for questions here if you want to jump back in, Darren.
Fantastic. Really interesting talk, Brian. Lots of things to kind of marinate on there. I mean, I'll open up first. By the way, folks, if you want your questions answered, get them in now while we still do have Brian. Of course, like you said, he's available later, but you've got him now, so use him. It was kind of interesting listening to the way you were describing that later part of it, like this kind of situation where, what you're advocating for is a regular kind of finger on the pulse, right, to what you're actually servicing at the end of the day. And I guess maybe my first thought is, a lot of these systems operate, even when they shouldn't, still on kind of waterfall design, right? Like by development nature, like loads of these teams are still operating with a clear plan of what's going to happen in 2 years' time. And I guess what I want to ask you is, there's kind of this awkward issue whenever you get into that kind of bad motion of not looking and not iterating regularly. There's always this blame game that goes on. Like, should we have empowered the employees, or should it have been leadership's call to dictate that we should be regularly checking in with the end users and coming back and forth regularly? Like, where do you kind of lay on that? Do you feel like this is one of the situations where you should empower the full workforce? Everyone is equally responsible, or do you think it's better to have someone kind of strong-headed at the top who is enforcing this more engaging approach to business?
Well, so yes, you need leadership to establish a culture of teams that feel ownership over the problem sets that they're working on. But by definition, yes, it becomes a whose fault is it game when the project is 2 years behind. And then when it finally goes live, it's out of date. The tech stack has changed. The business doesn't even need that thing anymore. And it took 2 years to do it. It's kind of self-fulfilling. And then no one wants to really take credit for the ship that's sinking, right? So by definition, it's not to say that some projects aren't going to be multi-year long things, but I don't think everything that if anything, the tooling has gotten so much easier that it shouldn't take as long as some of these projects actually do. And what I see most teams managing to is a project management schedule, is to doing, even if they're doing agile, they're managing to sprints and scrums and saying, did we follow the process? And if we did, then we're doing it right. And so did this feature get built? Yes or no? I'm not talking about machine learning features, but just features or increments of technology. Did it get built or not? That becomes the measurement, because that's the easy thing to measure. The harder thing to measure is the outcome piece. But I think that, for example, if you're a machine learning engineer, and I talked about this, I think, on the panel discussion yesterday that I was on, an example of this, like if you're tasked with like, we want to help the sales team get better at calling the best leads because we have millions or thousands or millions of customers and we don't know who to call, but we think we have all this signals data. There's signal in the data that could be used to predict who is most likely to buy, right? The short-term answer may be, you know what, in the next 3 weeks, we are going to give each member on your team a list of 100 people to call. And we're not going to be able to tell you how we came up with it, but we can build a model that will give you some kind of prediction, and we have fair confident, we're 50% confident with it. Would that be helpful and better than guessing right now? And then maybe they say, sure, that's fine, but I'm going to need to know how you came up with those names. Great. Let's get started with that. The next thing we're going to do is build some intelligence into the CRM. So every morning it generates an email to you with the most updated list based on real-time activity. And then the third version of it is actually going to start telling you how it came up with that. That's going to take 2 years for us to make that. But ultimately, what we care about is, are we helping you make better phone calls? And what's the success metric? It's 12 or 15% more of the calls that we make actually land into a converted sale within the first 6 months. That's our outcome. And the head of data science or the head of the team is tightly woven in with the VP of sales, and they're tracking it together because they're both on the mission together. And so, yes, there's a 2-year solution, but there's a 10-minute, there's a 3-week solution too, if you think about it that way.
No, I like that. The whole idea that essentially you're questioning the process and you're trying to fix it instead of kind of reaching that stage of inevitability that I think exists in a lot of bigger businesses, right? Where it's like, well, this is just going to run the course now, right? We'll review when it's done. Instead, like, no, can we actually stop this ship before it crashes? And
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
often the answer is yes.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so looks like we've got some questions starting to come in. First one comes out from Mirko. They say, great talk, first of all. And they want to ask, what is for you the biggest sin, as in like hidden behind technically sound choices, that companies commit when designing and building data products? If you can pinpoint one example, that would be great. But there you go.
I would say that the biggest sin, if we're going to use that word, so frequently when I talk to teams, when they're feeling they're having some kind of problem with either a tool or the team itself, they want to get better at this work, is that they're even self-diagnosing their own problem, and they can't actually explain to me what an improvement would look like. They don't know what an outcome for themselves would be, what the success metrics would be for, say, getting, like, someone says, oh, we want to take your training seminar, and my first question is always, well, how will you know if it did a good job? Like, what would change in your world if your team went through my training? What kinds of change would you want to start seeing? What do progress metrics look like? And in 6 months, what does success look like? How will we know that, so that I can align my training with your outcomes? And this is the same problem I see with the data products themselves, is they can't tell me what a good job is. A good job to them means technically sound, passes QA, there's no security issues, and it's all the technical attributes, but they usually have no idea who it's for. Not no idea, but they're not intimately knowledgeable about how it's going to serve the users and how it fits into their life and the impact it's going to have on the users that it's for. They can't explain that to me because they haven't had that exposure time. That's probably the number one issue that I see. We
I
don't
love
even
that.
know where the finish line is. We
No,
don't know when we
that's fine.
cross it. Yeah.
It reminds me of this kind of situations where you ask someone in detail to articulate what their problem is, and they just keep coming back like it's bad or it's good, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're not going to be
But
a
we need
movie
a new
reviewer any day
dashboard.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I get almost everyone that contacts me from product companies. It's, we need our dashboard redesigned. We need dashboard work. I mean, I have a client right now, and guess what? Really, what he really wanted was, I need to close 8 sales, and a sale is worth $300,000 in annual revenue for me, and I got to close this 2.4 million in the next year so that I can get funding for my B round or my A round or whatever it was. That's what I actually need. I need a sales aid that shows what our technology can do.
Okay.
But what he came to me was a presenting problem, which is, we need to redesign our dashboard. We have a POC from engineering, but it doesn't look good. I had to get into his headspace and understand what a positive outcome meant for him. And that's ultimately what it was. And that changes how I approach the work, because I'm not designing the product now, I'm designing a sales aid. And those actually aren't the same thing.
No, I like that approach. You
Yeah.
know, instead of just box ticking, right? Like get an objective in mind. And
Yeah.
well, it looks like Stevens came through with a question. They said, how important is it for customers with data-driven business to build? Sorry, this is going to build their competence on ML models for real-time decision making. Sorry, Stevens. I may have butchered that slightly. It was a bit. Sorry, give me a sec. I'm just going to read through it again. Okay, so I think what he's trying to say is, how important is it for customers with a data-driven business model to build their competence on ML models for real-time decision making? Are they going to say data maturity of the customer is crucial if he wants or doesn't want to use their ML models? But he agrees a big percentage of businesses are not data mature enough, and they need only decision support systems.
So again, you asked about how important is this technical capability within the organization. And while all teams are going to have their domains and certain skill sets that are required, to me, the question is, how does your team getting better at real-time machine learning skill translate to some business strategy that has been laid down from the top and then it gets disseminated across the different business units. And that's probably, you're probably dealing with one of these business units. And I would say, well, how does that fit into what the objectives of this leader, that this leader has? That's the question. It's not like, should in isolation, should we develop this kind of skill set? And if you're telling me that there's a data literacy problem, I kind of gave my stance on that. Yes, there's probably improvement for math skills and statistics, and I agree, statistics should be taught in high school, not calculus. I've never even taken statistics myself. I learned a lot of this on my own because I realized how much more practical it is to know about this. However, most people working in the organization don't want to go learn statistics. They don't care. I challenge you to meet these people where they're at right now, because you want to deliver some increment of value. And shooting for the moon when they're already afraid of flying. They're just ready to take their first biplane ride, and you're talking about building a rocket ship. They're not going to get on that rocket ship yet because there's too much risk involved with it potentially. So meet them with whatever altitude, whatever comfort level that they're at to make decisions, whether it's real time or not. Maybe 1 day delay is enough because they're only looking at this solution once a week anyways. And you're talking about building on all of the additional debt required to build a streaming real-time system when users are checking in once a week on Monday to make sure nothing's on fire and nothing has changed. And they'll look at it next Monday. We just spent a lot of time and money building a real-time system for no reason. Unless you know that things are over time, you felt that, usage is increasing and you can see eventually it's going to become a daily tool or whatever. The point is like that it feels a little data centric is what I would say to the person that asked that question. That feels not customer centered, that approach. It feels like what we're talking about our skilling,
I get where you come from. Yeah, it's essentially trying to, instead of deciding what your end goal is, you're essentially just trying to fix all the middle stuff first, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
It's kind of reverse where you should be at.
Yeah.
I think that was our final question. But
Okay.
Brian, you've been absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure if people have more questions they think of down the line, your contact details are on the screen and you seem like a very approachable dude. But seriously, dude, thank you. Absolutely thought-provoking discussion coming out there. Loved it. And I'm looking forward to catching up with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving to the Americans in the audience. Go World Cup. Thank you, Big Daddy EU, for having me too.
Cheers, Brian. Okay, folks, that is going to round us out. Amazing talk coming out from Brian. Really a lot there to digest. I love the approach of kind of like targeting the end goal, right? Making sure you have a clear picture of what you want to do instead of getting bogged down in the journey, right? The journey can come second. But our journey is coming to a close. That's right. That is all that she wrote, I'm afraid. We've got nothing more on the agenda. I know, tear in your eye. You are hoping to absorb more knowledge. I'm sure you haven't absorbed all the knowledge that happened across the last 2 days. We had 4 different panels going on at any given time outside of our keynote speakers, which means even if you were just consistently following one channel, you have like, what, I want to say at least 30 different talks to go back and look through. That's, of course, something you'll be able to do. But I'm going to start rounding this out. First of all, I do have to give a big shout out to our sponsors, though, without whom this wouldn't have been possible. Really big shout out to Telia, Amplitude, and Essentia. They made this possible. Hopefully, you guys did get some books from Manning's, or you have continued to rate the sessions and comment afterwards to stand a chance of winning those books. And, of course, a big shout out has to go to the organizers of this event. They work behind the scenes. They are the silent guardians, making sure everything runs tight and on schedule, and they do a phenomenal job of ensuring we have plenty of content to consume here. And of course, a shout out to my fellow track moderators, as well as all the speakers we've seen over the last 2 days. There's so much knowledge there that they've been willing to impart, and I'm sure you guys will crack on with dissecting it and taking what you can away from it. And of course, you guys, I have to thank as well, because if you weren't tuning in, we wouldn't even have someone to run this event for. So a really big shout out to all you cuties at home for turning up. But that is going to bring us to a close. Thank you once again for attending the Big Data Conference here in Europe in 2022. And we will hopefully see you next year. Dearly.